Let me take a moment just to introduce our panel tonight. First up is Reverend Farron Lee Elwin. They are representing the Pure Land Buddhist tradition tonight, so we get to learn about her experience. Next is Lilia Weber, who was raised Roman Catholic, but now is part of the Unitarian Universalist faith.
Hi.
She's followed by Ray Lemeshoff, who represents the Reconstructionist Jewish tradition. And we also have Jenny Lehman, who is a member of the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America. Our program tonight is going to be moderated by my very good friend, I should say our very good friend, Pastor Gowdy of the Metropolitan Community Church of the Lehigh Valley. So Pastor Gowdy, take it away.
It is so awesome to be here. What an honor at Metropolitan Community Church of the Lehigh Valley. It's quite a mouthful. We're also known as MCCLV, and it's always, always, always an honor to collaborate with Eastern PA Trans Equity Project. So there's such a rich diversity in this panel tonight. I'm so excited to hear more and learn more about each panelist. And so our first question, as a matter of sort of getting everyone's background, if each panelist could share your religious background, that's the title of our program tonight, right? Transitioning in faith. So share with us a little bit about your religious background. I'm just going to go by who I see on the screen. So first I see Ray Lemeshoff, if you could share about your Reconstructionist background.
Yeah, I would love to. And thank you so much for having me here today. It's an absolute pleasure and an honor to be on this panel. So my background is kind of interesting because I am actually first generation American as well. Both of my parents are from the former Soviet Union, where the practice of Judaism was incredibly difficult to maintain. So over several family generations after the start of the Soviet Union, we had lost our traditions of Jewish practice. And it was only when my parents both separately emigrated to the United States that they separately began exploring what Judaism meant to each of them. And after having me and my brother, there was a slight attempt to raise us in the culture, not so much the faith. And it was sporadic at best. At the same time, I was struggling with my own gender identity as a teenager. And it was an interesting intersection for me of finding both the right words to describe my gender identity, as well as my university Hillel, which is a group to support Jewish faith, practice, identity in college simultaneously. So coming into my identity as a man was simultaneous for me as coming into my identity as a Jew, and they've become very intertwined. My sense of masculinity is rooted in my faith, and it makes the relationship to both of those things all the deeper and more impactful for me.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ray. And next we have Jennifer, who comes to us from an Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, the ELCA background. Share a little bit more about your faith background, Jennifer.
Hi, thank you very much for allowing me to be a part of this panel, Corinne and Pastor Gowdy. I really joined the church basically when my family started needing to be baptized. So I've been married for 37 years, have kids that are fully grown. And so about 30 years ago or so, we needed a place to have the kids baptized, and went to the local church where we heard a lot of good things. And I really became quite involved, not at first, but throughout the years, quite involved. I currently teach Sunday school. My kids went through the youth group. My wife, who I'm still with, was on church council and doing and the church treasurer as well. So we were almost kind of like a power couple towards my transition time frame. which made it very interesting to transition at the time, because for the better part of 20 years, I was a man and a father figure in the church, and now I'm a woman figure at the church. So I kind of grew up through that church and learned a lot about myself, as well as the transition was very instrumental for myself through the church, and the church played a very, very large part of what I did in transition.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jennifer. And Reverend Farron, you come from a Pure Land Buddhism tradition. If you could share more about that with us.
Yes, and thank you both for organizing this. I'd like to start off that yeah, I am a Pure Land Buddhist. I came through Buddhism through of course, you know, I mean, I came through Buddhism through conversion, and with a particular look into Buddhism that is often shared with a lot of Westerners. So just a little, I have a just as a little note there, and I originally became interested in Pure Land Buddhism when I read that the Buddhist Church of San Francisco, I think it was San Francisco, was one of the first Buddhist churches to actually hold same-sex marriages. I come from a family of, I had two moms. And so that was very important to me, that that was something that was allowed. And through my development through Buddhism, I eventually came upon Pure Land, which generally continued to ring with me, as far as some a very it's a very sort of accepting. So it's generally about all acceptance and all that. So really resonated with it, and as I grew in my religion, I started being able to discover other parts of me, such as being trans, non-binary, and being bi, and yeah, that's pretty much how it's gone for me. So yeah, thank you.
And thank you. And then we also have Lilia from the originally a Roman Catholic tradition and now a Unitarian Universalist tradition. Share a little bit with us.
Sure. Hi. Thank you again to Corinne and Reverend Gowdy, and all the panelists. So I was, raised as Roman Catholic from, a youth and I followed that tradition through college ages. And after that, I mostly just kind of drifted away. There was no, real removal of myself from that tradition. At that point, I didn't even understand that I was trans at that point, really. So that didn't mix into it at all. Then fast forward about till I was in my low 40s. And I found myself in need of some answers to questions I had. Questions, though, involved, where I belong, as well as my identity. And read some articles and read more about what Unitarian Universalism is, and it rang true to me in terms of its values. It has these 7 principles, and and it spoke to me, and it spoke to me that you were wanting to explore your spirituality through that faith. So I found a church that was actually a half mile from the apartment I was living in, and I didn't even know it was there. Walked in the door, and I was not presenting as myself. I was presenting as a previous embodiment, and kind of what evolved into that community, trying to find out, is there a space for me as a questioning trans person? I was there for 15 years, and in those 15 years, part of my coming out process was helping them form a welcoming congregation attribution to their congregation. So that is their learning process. Some other faith traditions call it open and affirming and that sort of thing. So as I helped the congregation move in that direction with a couple other people, I came out more and more and more, and served on the board, from trustee to president to vice president to secretary, in both genders. I mean, I actually transitioned while I was continuing there, and the congregation voted me in both genders, because built before and after I transitioned in the community. So it was a real nurturing community for me, and it still follows me. I mean, I'm not connected with that congregation anymore, but I still call myself a Unitarian Universalist. And I'll keep it there for now. So thank you.
And thank you, Lilia. And in fact, that's a great segue to our next question, which we're again going to ask of each panelist, because again, the title of tonight's program, Transitioning in Faith. And so, there are people who are watching this program who are, who want their congregation to be more trans friendly. And so if each panelist could share, well, what were the positives and the challenges of coming out in your faith community? What went well? What didn't go so well? Maybe let's start with the challenge and then end with a blessing. Again, I see Ray first. And so Ray, if you could share with us your coming out process in the context of your faith community.
Yeah, absolutely. So my coming out process had a lot of starts and stops. I actually first attempted to come out in high school when I was still living at home. At the time, my parents weren't particularly supportive. They are since some of my biggest advocates, I'm really pleased to say. But before I was of legal age, there was a lot of headbutting. So I went back into the closet through college. And when I dropped out of college for a semester to find myself, I wound up in Pittsburgh living in an Orthodox Jewish community by sheer happenstance. It was not related to my faith journey at the time, but I was working at a kosher butcher shop. I was making friends with the Orthodox rabbis in town. And one particular rabbi saw something in me, saw that I needed help and guidance, and sort of took me under his wing. And I was really hesitant to be honest with him about what was going on. It took months for me to be honest that I was struggling with my gender identity. And I didn't expect him to react well, being that he was, ultra Orthodox Jewish faith. And rightfully so for the community. There was a lot of challenge when it finally entered the broader community that I was trans, and folks stopped talking to me. I stopped getting invites to come over for Shabbat dinners on Friday. But the good news is that this particular individual rabbi said, forget that. The golden rule of Judaism is that you love your people and you love your God and you receive that love back. And if your relationship with God is leading you down this path, and that is the truth. And no human can comment otherwise. And he was the first person to really expand for me my understanding of what is possible within religion, because I thought my two identities, being Jewish and trans, would always be in conflict with one another. So he encouraged me to go outside the bounds of what I had previously understood Judaism to be and explore more nascent branches of the faith. And when I finally founded upon Reconstructionist Judaism, it felt like home. And the irony was I would have never wound up here if it wasn't for my experience in the ultra-Orthodox community that decided to shun me.
Wow. Wow. Thank you so much, Ray. And next we have Jennifer. If you could share with us your coming out process in your ELCA church. Were there any struggles? What was challenging? What went really well in the process?
I transitioned in about 2013, but I really I had a pretty strong relationship with the Lord prior to that, or God and Jesus. We kind of I had a come to Jesus moment, as they would call it, about in 2010 or so, where I really felt very strongly that this was something that I needed to do, a purpose that I needed to do for God, and to take it to somewhere. So I really started transitioning physically about 3 years before I actually came out to people. So I kind of looked a lot like Ray in 2010. Maybe not as handsome, but pretty close. And by 2013, my hair had grown out and things like that. So people kind of knew I was having some type of a crisis going on, I suppose. But when I got to the other large part of it was, as I explained, my family is very, very involved in that church. And so at this point, my wife, Karen, and I we realized that we needed to come up with a real plan for how to do it in the church so that we weren't, she actually worked at the preschool there, so that we weren't destroying the church, and we were also not destroying or creating havoc with her job and a variety of things. So we ended up talking to the pastor, who was very welcoming. At this point, the church had basically split already, and in 2009, they had accepted LGBT pastors that were in committed relationships. So that had kind of shaken out everything. And then, so it was a little cleaner path for us, because it was a little less, not as many people voicing negative opinions on that. But even so, the pastor needs to be for the rest of the congregation as well as the rest of us. So we ended up hiring a facilitator to have discussion within the congregation to alleviate the problem that the pastor would have in trying to advocate for us. So this person that we hired became the advocate. It took about 3 or 4 months of conversations, but it really went very, very well. And that'll be the next portion of what we talk about.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jennifer. And Farron, if you could share with us, what was your coming out process like in the context of your faith? And you are muted, Farron. So.
Thank you. It was initially, it was pretty great. I first came out to a few members of the. I was part of a Pure Land organization that had an order that ran things, and I came out to the head of ministry and someone who was a mentor of mine. And they were very, very welcoming. It was great. then I sent a message to the head of the order, who was not so welcoming. He basically we had a back and forth in emails where he didn't want to uh, recognize my pronouns or anything. So I had a talk with the previous two people who I I was talking to, who I was closer to anyway, and they brought it to they talked to the head of the order, and well, long and short of it is the head of the order wouldn't back down or uh, anything, and he essentially those a number of the members of the order, because of this, split off and created a new group, which I'm now a part of, and yeah, that was probably the most challenging part. I had to. I ended up. I never joined the order, but I was 2 weeks away from ordination, uh, and I decided, well, this isn't for me. I'm not going to be ordained by someone um, who is anti-trans. So, uh, but I got a lot of support. There was a lot of people who just up and they left. We formed another group, and they support me, and that's been that's been wonderful. I've also gotten a lot of encouragement from other branches of Pure Land, which has been great. And I mean, other than not, so I'm not an ordained minister, but I am recognized as a minister in my particular faith group, the new one. And it's been wonderful. We're kind of starting starting a new thing. So
That
yeah,
is wonderful.
overall great.
Yes, yes, it's a beautiful thing to experience that support. And Lilia, share with us about your coming out process. What went well in that process? What was challenging in that process?
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, my evolution of coming out was long and slow, probably over a period of guessing here, 8 years, I think, where I was called a gay guy. I was called because some people I told and some people I didn't tell. There was over time, but I definitely used the facility of the congregation going through this learning process, becoming the welcoming congregation, that offered me the chance to explain things and educate the community on a broader topics, not just trans, but it was about being not just accepting, but affirming and, moving into that loving direction as opposed to the any of the negative end of the scale, whether it's skepticism or even hatred, but moving onto the affirming side. And that was empowering to me, and it gave me more and more confidence to be myself. and to present as myself. It got to a point where I needed to bring all of myself to church anymore. Anything less was not enough. So that was really the first place that I felt that I was living as Lilia. I mean, you know, I would meet up with friends or something on a weekend or a night or something, but in the congregation, then I felt like, no, this is who I am, and that gave me much more. It felt more and more right, so to speak, and you know, the rest of my life kind of followed that, whether it was coming out with my blood family, and I actually met my spouse in our congregation, and we were married there prior to. I mean, I was I identified myself as trans, but I was not presenting most of the time. Although I had the, you know, ponytail and that kind of thing. So, you know, people knew there was a crisis maybe, but that was where I was on my journey. And we're you know, together, just past our 10-year anniversary, so that's all good. But so that was the good part, that process of really finding myself at the same time through living in that community. The negatives were small and bumps in the road. You know, there were just like a family. This congregation was a small congregation, and it's like a large family. So there's the people that refuse to get the pronouns right, and they're angry about having to try, and they're yeah, and it. But then you still have the others that truly love you for who you are, and so you just, that's who you focus with, you know, and so it's there was a lot of family type dynamics there. So
what a great way to put it, that we of course we want to bring our whole selves to our faith community. That's an important thing.
Yeah, it was big. I mean, when I finally came to that realization for myself, it was like, oh yeah, I need to be there. I can't, you know, put myself in a box and, you know, put on khaki pants and go to church. No, it was like I needed to be there. And
absolutely.
You know, yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. What we're going to move into next is there were some specific questions that were raised prior to our gathering here tonight. So I want to make sure I get to those. And we'll start with Ray. And Ray's question is about gender roles in religion. And can trans identities affirm those, dismantle those gender roles, or both? So share with us a little bit on that, Ray, gender roles in religion.
I think that's a beautiful question. And I like to say the answer is both. You know, but it's fantastic about the trans communities. We've really shown that gender is exactly what you want it to be when you create it. And it was really radically freeing and scary to bring that same mindset to my practice of Judaism, because when I was in Pittsburgh in the ultra-Orthodox community, and even when my parents had tried to expose me and my younger sibling to Jewish practice growing up, it was in the conservative and Orthodox movement, which is very binary gender delineated, where literally there is a separation of men and women in the synagogue, and there is a partition between the two sides of the synagogue so that the men are not distracted from their deep prayer, and the women have the opportunity to gather and have their community time and be exposed to prayer, but not play an active role in it. And I just remember growing up and like trying to look through the partition, and my vision of these men was draped in prayer shawls and like so deep in their faith that they're like rocking with, I guess, the Holy Spirit is still appropriate to say, but being moved by their direct connection to God, I was like, that is really cool and it's forbidden. So I want in on that. And now I'm part of a congregation that is actually led by a trans rabbi. And it's just so beautiful to see the entire congregation be moved together. And we have men, women, cisgender, transgender, non-binary folks, agender folks, people who are just like, I don't really know what gender is and I don't want to. I'm making it up as I go and it feels good. And we have so many different expressions of Jewish gender there too, where we have folks who wear yarmulkes regardless of their gender identity. We have folks who put on, they're called tefillin. You may see pictures of people with like leather bindings on their arms while they pray. And it's just such a liberating space because it can affirm your gender or you can reject it completely and say, this is just how I practice faith and I won't be limited by who is permitted or not permitted to partake. And I find that beautiful. We have a saying in our congregation that God is queer and so are we.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Ray. What a great vision of community, of faith community. And Jennifer, share with us about when you shared your story with the congregation, what you found in sharing your story is that other people opened up to you about their stories. And what a beautiful thing that is. Can you share a little bit more about that?
It was probably one of the biggest blessings, unexpected blessings that I ended up having through this experience, this journey that we've had. I was so afraid that I would alienate people and wouldn't have the same friends or anything like that when I came out. So that was a huge worry. And of course, people were very curious as we started to come out and share our story. Karen, my wife, was a big influence in sharing our story as well. But you know, you get finished a service, and you'd all meet out at the narthex or out in the parking lot. You're talking a little bit, and somebody corners you, and you start getting into that little bit of conversation and things. And they're asking why or how or what is it to be trans, and what's it mean, and why did you do this, or why did you have to? And literally, you know, within 15 or 30 seconds, they almost tune it out and stop me. And I was like, I gotta tell you, this is like a 15-minute story. It's not a 15-second one. There's 4 or 5, 6 years of stuff that I need to tell you. And no, I couldn't get it out a lot of times because they would share with me what was really in their hearts. And it didn't have anything to do with LGBT. It had to do with what they're struggling with in their life at that time. And it was so diverse, and it was just so amazing to be able to connect, because a lot of times after church or with even with your church friends, you're hey, how you doing? Oh, I'm doing good. How you? Oh, fine. See you next Sunday. Never got into anything. So this allowed us to really form some really much deeper relationships with people. And it was such a blessing. And isn't that really what faith and religion are really all about? To help each other during those periods of times. And they were very profound and very meaningful. So it was quite a blessing and quite unexpected.
Mm-hmm. And listening to Ray and Jennifer talk about those experiences, the word liberation kept coming to my head. What a liberating thing, not just for you, but for the congregation also.
As well.
Yeah. Farron, tell us about trans-friendly Buddhist communities. How do we access resources? How do we find a trans-friendly Buddhist community? Where do we go? Typically we go online to find things, but tell us tell us how we locate a trans-friendly Buddhist congregation.
Well, that's a good question. Usually, a congregation or a Buddhist community nowadays, they tend to be, if they are inclusive of trans people, they make it pretty well known. And especially such organizations like Buddhist Churches of America, which is a form of Pure Land. So they're a good start right there. There are places online. I'm actually part of a Discord for trans Buddhists of many different faiths, of many different traditions. So they are out. They are pretty easy to find on the internet, and they tend to make themselves very, like I said, very well known. It's kind of a bit of a pushback from a lot of there is a, I guess you could say, a current within Western Buddhism which really tries to minimize identities of any kind, unless it's a certain one. So yeah, definitely. They're on the internet. There's a Reddit that's for trans people, and yeah, that's where you can find that stuff.
Yes. When in doubt, go to Reddit.
Yeah.
Reddit has just about everything. Thank you, Farron. And Lilia, share with us if there's someone who's watching this webinar here tonight and they're thinking, well, I want my congregation to go through this welcoming process. I want my congregation to be known as a welcoming congregation. Take us through some of the steps. What's the process there? What do you recommend? Oh, you're muted, Lilia. So yep.
Okay, there we go. Thank you. I was trying to be nice and quiet, so I put myself on mute. Within the Unitarian Universalist faith, there, like as I mentioned, there was this. There's a ministry called the. I think they're calling it the LGBT ministries, but it is basically the path of all congregations go through that. And at the time, it was called Welcoming Congregation. I think they're maybe updating the name, and I can't remember what the new one is. But at the time, it was, you requested a book, and it was a book filled with suggested learning courses, and then there was a lot of extracurricular activities that you did with the congregation to bring LGBTQ topics into the conversation. So whether it was celebrating certain holidays or events or particular times of the year. And the process, when we did it with our congregation, it was almost 2 years. It took nearly 2 years to really get to the point where you felt that everyone was educated, and then the congregation actually votes to say, yes, we want to call ourselves a welcoming congregation. You know, there initially, when you first started that conversation, people were afraid to be called the gay church. There was still stigma. And so that education process is to break down that stigma and have the congregation really get to the point where, no, we're talking about love, and we're talking about caring for our fellow humans on the earth, and they need our help. I mean, in general, Unitarian Universalist people tend to be pretty liberal and pretty open-minded, but there's still culture out there that says, we could be afraid of being open and liberal. So that's some of the stuff you have to work through, and probably that occurs in any. I mean, I have spoken at a couple different faiths over the years, whether American Baptists and UCC, and and they all have their different points on the scale of where they were with their open and affirming processes. But I think you can't rush it. It really takes time, and you have to be patient for the congregation to come to that spot where, and then looking back, they say, what was the big deal? But it just like transitioning with a family, you wind up I mean, that to use the analogy, to have a congregation become one of these affiliated open and affirming or welcoming congregations, you're taking the congregation through a transition process. And it just so happened I was on the ride for myself at the same time, but it didn't. I mean, I was still not presenting at the end of that. When the church became a welcoming congregation, I wasn't fully transitioned yet, but I had pretty much told everybody I was trans at that point. It took me longer for myself, and I didn't necessarily even want to confuse that. It was a gift I wanted to give to the congregation, and a service I saw that it wasn't about me at that point. But so I rambled a little there, but I hope that was coherent. So
it was coherent. Thank you so much, Lilia, for walking us through that process. And that's a good reminder. It is a process. You said that the congregation you were a part of was like a big family in some ways. And so it's, it does take time. It is
lots of conversations.
Yeah. Yes. And Corinne, just wanted to check in and see if there are any further questions on the chat.
Well, we have a couple comments or questions. So one person said, so did transitioning alter the way that you participated in your faith community? For example, traditional gender-based faith roles, and if so, how? Jenny, you want to go?
At the time I was transitioning, I actually was leading the men's prayer group, and I couldn't really continue to do that. I could have, I suppose, but one, I didn't want to provide mixed signals along the way, and two, the men need a space of their own where they can talk about things. So, and I knew that because I used to be a man, so of what we would talk about. So I ended up having to give up some of the traditional things that I was leading. And I did gravitate for a little while at some of the more traditional female roles. I'm pretty handy with my hands and fixing things, so I could be part of the people that help fix the place up. But I kind of elected to do more of the food oriented things. But I think a lot of that was because of how I was compartmentalizing and not trying to send mixed signals and trying to be maybe more feminine. Today, maybe after 7-8 years, I'm actually gravitating more towards just doing whatever it is that I feel like doing, and not really having a perspective on gender, what the gender responsibilities are, except for leading men's prayer breakfast.
Anybody else have thoughts on that around traditional male oriented roles or activities within a congregation versus feminine side? Ray?
Yeah, so I alluded to this a little bit in my previous answer, but the Judaism that I grew up with was very segmented in terms of gender role and appropriate action. And so one of the first things about transitioning for me was I get to change the way that I practice Judaism. There's actually a program called Birthright where every Jew has the opportunity to travel to Israel for free. And I did so in my 20s. I did it about a month after first starting hormone replacement therapy. And that was super important for me to begin before going to Israel because I wanted to be able to pray on the man side of the Wailing Wall. And it was probably the single most moving moment for me within my faith. It was the first moment, even though my voice hadn't yet dropped, didn't have any facial hair, still was incredibly petite and feminine. I was like, that's it. I'm a man. Don't care what anyone else says or how anyone else perceives me. And I'm actually really thankful for that moment because while my practice of gender in my faith changed, so too did my practice of gender outside my faith because don't let the button-down shirt fool you. I came here for my day job, but amongst friends and family, I don't feel the need to ascribe to a very specific type of masculinity. I was really liberated from toxic masculinity culture and the need to prove like, oh yeah, I'm a manly man. I'm a bro. I'm a guy. Like I got this. I really don't care how people perceive me because my entire idea of masculinity is rooted in a place where I feel safe to express it in the way that I want and the way that makes me feel whole as opposed to meeting someone else's expectations.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting concept, right? So that, it's really about intersectionality, right? So, how do you, as an individual who, or I should say, how do we as individuals who potentially can, make a bridge between masculinity and femininity and these sort of very traditional roles? And are those mores that we want to break down, or do we want to really sort of revel in that femininity or masculinity of our quote unquote new role in our true gender? I think that's a really interesting concept. Anybody else have any thoughts around that? I'll just go on about intersectionality if you want all night. I'm just saying. So yeah, Farron.
I just want to say in my particular group, we don't really have any real gender roles. We have men who are teachers, women who are teachers, binary people who are teachers. So it's not really an issue there, but going to other Buddhist organizations, there is more of a split. Like at some Vietnamese temples, you do have to, if you're a woman, you sit on one side of the Buddha hall. If you're a man, you sit on the other side. So that's where my challenges tend to be, more of negotiating the other branches, because as a Buddhist, you're often interacting with other traditions, because most of the time the tradition you practice may not exactly be the one that's closest to you, because we're pretty scattered. So that's the only issues I've ever seen for myself.
Cool. Yeah, Lillian.
I've got one funny story. So I sang in the choir. I sang bass. And after I transitioned, I still sang bass. That's where, my singing voice was solid. And so I had to train the director to no longer call out, okay, men, you sing this part, and women, I said, no, it's the basses and tenors, because I'm singing over here with the basses and tenors. Yes. So it was just, and it was, week after week, their pianist she was on it with me. She's like, it's the basses and tenors, you just get on with it. But I found it a little comical after a while, but yeah, it was fun experiences. And then, our congregation would join with larger groups of interfaith choruses. And, I would walk in and they're like, alto? And I'm like, no, bass. And I'd get up there between the guys and start singing. And it's, I just brought what I could bring, and that's the instrument I had. So, so it's just some fun with it.
I think that's actually a really great phrase. I brought what I can bring, right? And that's really all we can do, in anything that we endeavor in. So here's a comment from somebody, and Grace and I apologize if I'm going to mangle your words, this individual was talking about the Unitarian Universalists, and they changed the name to Affirming Congregation. And the change in that nomenclature was based on the idea that it's good to be welcoming of others, but they also want to be caring and affirming for those who are there. So I think that's an interesting thought process, right? Is that, so if you're coming out within a congregation and maybe you're the first person of trans experience in that congregation, people don't necessarily have experience with people with trans experience, is that how responsible are we for making everybody else feel comfortable versus them making us feel comfortable? I think that's an interesting type of conversation to have. As somebody who, by the way, I'll raise my hand, I'm an atheist. So I am the odd person out here tonight. But anybody have thoughts on that about, the idea of, do we have a responsibility to make the congregation or the gathering comfortable? Yeah, Jenny.
I did take it upon myself quite a bit to make the congregation, the people around me, and then the new people coming in feel comfortable around me. Maybe that's just because I'm more talkative and kind of outgoing. But I did spend a lot of time and trying to get my congregation to be comfortable with who I am. We and who Karen and I were becoming. Our congregation was not welcoming in the sense Lilia's and the Unitarians were. We didn't have that nomenclature. We still don't. Although at the front of our church, we're on a big hill, so you can see us way up from the road, is in the red, green, blue banners, God's doors are open to everyone. And that wasn't actually done by Karen and myself. It was done by the motivation of other people within the congregation to do it. So Karen and I basically laid low and said, we've done enough. We transitioned. That's all we're going to do. And then everybody else became more welcoming. So maybe it passed in through them.
Anybody else have thoughts on that? On what is our level of obligation to make others feel comfortable?
I'll add to that. There's a joke generally about Jews that 2 Jews, 3 opinions. There is a very long-standing and spirited tradition of debate in the Jewish culture. And I don't know if this is really an answer so much as a further exploration with more questions, but my approach to relating to fellow Jews and other people in general has been a recognition of that 2 people, 3 opinion, yours, mine, and ours. And I don't think I have the obligation to make anyone comfortable so much as I owe to myself, more than the other person really, but to myself, the recognition that there is a space in the middle somewhere, and I can't close myself off from that. We won't necessarily arrive to the same place together, but if we can journey somewhat towards each other in an instant, I have an obligation of openness. I don't have an obligation to make that path easier for you to travel. I don't have the obligation to make you comfortable in my identity, but I can just move towards you. And that has generally been a good way for me to approach most situations in my life. And another thing that Judaism has taught me is even amongst that debate, there's still the opportunity to come together in prayer and in celebration. So when I disagree with others, we might not share the same faith, but is there a place of celebration and recognition of the sameness in one another that we can go to so that the next time we can maybe move closer together in that third space?
So keeping an open mind in terms of, there's probably some common ground somewhere, and seeking out that common ground will help break down even more barriers.
Exactly. And not making room for anyone to disrespect you or to deny your identity. I'm not here saying like excuse all behaviors, but a lot of the time discomfort from others is concurrently existing with the desire to still connect with you and be in that same congregation or family or friend circle or whatever it is with you. The discomfort is coming from a place of fear that togetherness is going to be lost. So is there still a way for us to move towards each other and remain open? But if you're being a destructive individual coming at me with harm, then that's off the table.
Perfect. Anybody else on that topic? Okay, so we have another question or comment here. So what might
Corinne, can I just interrupt really quickly right before you ask that next question, because I'm going to forget to ask this question if I don't ask it now. So it's just a very quick question. Sure. For those who are God-oriented, did your pronouns for God change at all in your transition? So if you used he pronouns for God prior to transition, did that change, or are the pronouns that you use for God still the same?
For me, they remain the same.
Mine changed, and not all Jewish practices use he, she, binary pronouns so much as titles that personify God. And that is a practice in me that has changed. It's no longer, creator, ruler, whatever. It turns more towards the spirit of oneness or the energy between us, and tries to remove the personification from God and understand it more as a state of being or a feeling.
For me, I definitely used goddess a lot more, but I think for where my faith puts me, it's the divine, and it's a divine energy, and it doesn't necessarily have one gender to me. So
Farron, you have anything you want to add?
Sure. Well, I guess I'm not exactly a God person, but I am devotional in my practice, and we do revere a Buddha, many Buddhas, but my way of traditionally they're often named as he, but I have actually switched them to they because in Buddhist tradition, stuff like that actually isn't supposed to. A Buddha is, even though it's technically okay to call them he or a pronoun or maybe he, it's not accurate. They don't really have. It's sort of this does not apply, and none of it applies to a Buddha. So I've switched to they when I do a lot of devotional stuff towards the Buddha.
For what it's worth, before I get to this next question, though, We are on July 27th, I think it is. We're having Joy Layden as a speaker. So Joy Layden is a scholar and a poet, wonderful poet, by the way, but they're not doing poetry. They're here to talk about God and religion and the Bible in terms of how it can be read from a trans and non-binary perspective. And I would really invite you all to come back for that, the folks who are watching, because Joy Layden is a joy, actually. So I think that'll be an interesting conversation that we'll have that night. So here's a question around what might any of you ask of allies, in the community as you travel through your faith journeys? Anybody have a thought on that? Silence descends on the group here.
I think I want to take a slightly different approach to that than most, instead of leading with openness or what you might ask of an ally in any context, but specific within faith communities. There is so often a conflation between faith practice and culture. Particularly, it's true in Judaism, where it's really difficult to separate one from the other, but it's important that we do, because there's so many practices that become a cultural norm without an actual faith principle or biblical or, whatever your preferred text is, aspect. And it's room in that gray area that allyship tends to get lost. And I would encourage folks to keep in mind that there is a separation between the two, and it's important to allow for the continued creation and editing of culture while maintaining a faith practice.
That's great. Yeah. Anybody else have thoughts on that topic? All right. So we'll give people a moment or two to see if there's any other quick questions that people might have, but maybe we'll just kind of go around and see if there's just, kind of like one message that, you wanted to deliver tonight that maybe you haven't had a chance to, or that you would like to, right? So I'm going to put you all on the spot. I'm going to start with Gowdy.
I was so fearful you were going to start with me, Corinne. Don't take Gowdy.
Proximity is a dangerous thing.
So I've just been so grateful. I just felt from the start of tonight that this was such a rich panel, just a lot of depth and breadth that has been represented here. And so I'm just going to go back to that word liberation, what I felt throughout tonight. And the word that I would return to is liberated. I've heard stories of liberation tonight, stories of freedom and becoming and being who one is truly called to be. And that is such a beautiful, beautiful process. And it's an honor to hear those stories.
Perfect. How about you, Farron? Anything that you just wanted to make sure you got across tonight that we missed?
The only thing that ever usually comes up in these conversations in other contexts is just faith is so important in all of this, getting through all these ups and downs depending on different interactions. And I would certainly, faith from people who are transgender, and also faith from allies who, you don't have to understand, just trust us. Yeah. Just trust us.
That the power, one of the things, so, I mentioned before that I am not a person of faith. My wife very much is. And I know that for her, during my transition, as she has transitioned alongside of me, her faith, and more importantly, the community of faith has been very important, right? And community is, one of those things that helps us get through these challenging times. So I think that's an awesome point. How about you, Lilia?
That's kind of what I was going to say. I mean, I think, well, first is just from this panel, and if you go, if the person that's out there listening has ever felt rejected by a faith community, you can find a welcoming, open and affirming, and whatever other title somewhere out there that still is in your faith tradition. So go find it, because don't think the actions of a few people mean your faith and the way you want to connect with the divine is wrong. So that's a few people. You can find a community that will support you. You may have to travel, you may have to do it online, but you can find it. And I think for me that connection in that community with the faith connection was so strong and so supporting during transition that I don't know if I would have came out the same had I not had that support. So so I think it's so helpful. So find it, please.
Great. How about you, Jenny?
For me, the faith would really help me define a purpose and an understanding of why I was doing this, and it all came down to basically a couple things in the Bible that I keyed in on: love one another and love our neighbors as yourself. And my takeaway on that was that it was my purpose or my calling to do these changes so that other people would have to struggle/deal with these changes. And if we were all the same person, it wouldn't be that hard usually to love one another. But the diversity is what makes it complicated to love one another. And I'm part of that diversity equation, and that's what I was called to do. And given a very specific way of doing it that is very personal to what God had me do from birth to now and then future. So that really helped me a lot, having some type of guidance, some type of path that I was following.
Great. All right, Ray, you get the last word on this one.
I think I want to say that the divine is a feeling. Other people help you tap into it. Religion is a method of finding it regularly. And to piggyback off of what Lilia said, unfortunately in our community, faith practice does have ties to privilege, right? If you're not a transgender person, it's easier to find a faith community that helps you tap into that sense of the divine. It's harder for us. There are more obstacles in our way, but those challenges don't mean that discovering our place in a faith community is any less worth it. I'd say it's even more so. So the tenacity to continue pursuing it, deciding that it's something you want in your life. If you feel that calling, then listen to it, regardless of how long it takes. That's what got all of us here to this point in our transitions, and it's what can get us to our faiths as well.
Yeah, that's great. All right, so we have one last question here that I'm going to speak to. I'm going to ask you all to give me a real quick 1 or 2 word answer. We're going to be pithy, right? And that is, as somebody who wants to be an ally of transgender individuals, what's the best way that somebody can interact with you or to grow in their compassion? So what's one thing you would ask them to do? So let's start with Ray. We'll go backwards. I saw that eye roll.
It's more about oh my God, that's such a deep question to think of instantaneously. I was waiting for that moment of inspiration, but I would say that just like faith, compassion is a practice. No one comes into their faith perfect and flawless in it. We grow in it because we continue to come back. And that's the same with compassion, even if it begins with a regular greeting in your congregation and moves to spending the time in prayer together, to getting together outside of, I don't know what the right term is outside of Judaism. I'm so sorry, but your worship time, just start small and continue growing it, plant the seed and it will root.
Okay, good. That was an awesome one-word answer. You rule. Okay, how about you, Jenny?
I'm not sure the other panelists will agree with this or not, but me personally, I would like people to be welcome, to not be afraid to ask questions, and to not mean questions or anything like that, but actually talk about what our life experiences have been. I really miss the opportunity to talk about it.
Yeah, Zoom has done a lot of good things, but it's had some challenges, right, in terms of our ability to really have deep conversations, I think. Yeah, good. How about you, Lilia?
So in terms of how to bridge from being an ally that wants to find connection, as soon as this COVID thing is over, attend a conference. Go to the Philadelphia Trans Wellness Conference when it's in person and just walk around and talk to people at desks and tables and get exposure. I mean, and there are support groups, Eastern PA Trans, and I think if you go with an open heart and wanting to learn, you will be respected into that community as an ally. So I think there's room to learn.
Super. How about you, Farron? Be pithy.
Like
me.
Google, patience, and openness.
I love that. Just, patience is good, I think. Yeah, be open. All right, Gowdy, you get the second to last word because I always get the last one.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think I would just echo a lot of what was already said. I think having compassion is other-centeredness. It's not about the ally. It's about taking an interest in others, right? So for me, that's a key to healthy allyship. And just being a healthy human being is like, it's not about what I feel, think, but it's really trying to truly get to know the other. It's that I-thou relationship.
Perfect. So somebody made a comment here about they call their journey into authenticity as their costume change, right? And I think that is a really wonderful sentiment, right? Is that, while, our outward appearance may change, some of our worldview may change, certainly other people's view of us may change, but ultimately the things that make us human, right? They don't really change, right? Kind of the things that fundamentally make us who they are. And you all kind of went around this topic, I think, about it, just like, get to know us. If you're open with us, we're going to be open with you. If you're respectful with us, we're going to be respectful with you. And if you're a person of faith, and I forget who said it, but is that, perseverance is a really good trait, right? And, you'll find the right place for you. So I want to thank everybody who came out tonight to listen. I want to thank Ray and Jenny and Lilia and Farron and Gowdy. All of you are wonderful. I am so pleased that you were able to join us tonight. And I hope that our audience will come back for a future workshop. Make sure you check us out at patransequity.org and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Have a good night, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Good night. Bye.
Bye.